I'm going to speak to you about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I spent my career as an operator building product-led growth teams focused on product growth, retention, and monetization. And I've since brought that to my life as an investor. So I'm here to make sure you don't leave money on the table. We're going to match price to value and give you some lessons with concrete examples from companies I've worked at and companies in our portfolio. A little bit about me. I started my career in engineering and consulting, brought that to some new product development work. I was doing the 0 to 1 thing for a while. And then I became very fascinated by the high growth phase of a company. So I joined Evernote back in 2011 when we had about 10 million users. And over time, saw an opportunity for us to work more cross-functionally. So I started our product-driven growth team, this full-stack team comprised of engineers and product managers, analysts, marketers, to do this work together, to drive customers to stay and pay. I then brought that to a company called Invoice2Go. This is a mobile SMB product, a really easy way for these folks to send an invoice and get paid. And there I built out much of the org around product, data science, analytics, user research, and again, reoriented a subset of those folks to do this work, retention and monetization, and just fell in love with it. I just love this work so much and really got a lot of joy from advising companies on the topic as well, making sure they weren't leaving money on the table. That took me to programs like Reforge, which is a growth program in San Francisco. And now as an investor, I love my job getting to continue this advisory work, but also invest in companies. So I hope there's something here that each and every one of you can take back to your business and put into action. Report back, tell me what worked and didn't work so we can keep learning from each other. Let's get started. So we're going to talk about creating value for your customers. We want that to be compounding long-term accretive value. But we want to make sure you're being compensated appropriately for that value as well. I think monetization is a very underutilized lever. When we talk a lot about growth, we hear a lot about acquisition, a very important part of the flywheel. But I love this study that was done by our friends at Price Intelligently. They talked to 500 SaaS companies and looked at what a 1% improvement in acquisition, retention, and monetization did to a company's bottom line. And these results kind of speak for themselves, right? Monetization had a 4x impact over acquisition. So I'm here to plant a seed, how powerful this work can be when done effectively. So when I first meet a company, I like understanding how they thought about their pricing. What kind of philosophy do they have around pricing? And I'd like for each of you to think about where to bucket your company as I talk about the 3 different sort of buckets that tend to emerge when I talk to folks. So the first one is, it was pretty arbitrary. You just kind of pick something. So these are companies that are laboring over pixel-perfect design, bug-free product experiences, and yet they treated pricing as an afterthought. Huge missed opportunity. The next one is we made it artificially low. We didn't want to get in the way of people using it. So this tends to be a land and expand type strategy. A lot of freemium businesses like Evernote fall into this bucket. You want to get as many people as possible using it. You don't want price to be a factor at all. But over time, the hope is to upgrade them. And the challenge with this one is you could be creating issues for your future self in that once you've undercut yourself, it's really hard to drive a huge lift in ARPU, or average revenue per user, over time. So you might be getting a lot of users doing this land grab, but to get them to expand is going to be where you focus most of your energy long term. And then there's the third bucket. This is a quote from a company I met a few months ago, and I thought it perfectly illustrated my point. They're a premium product. They had a prospective customer tell them, "You're the apple of your category. I have to save budget to afford you." And that was fine by us. So listen to the restraint in this company compared to the previous one. Here they're saying philosophically, we're not going to discount just to get users. We're going to command our premium positioning. So you can probably bucket yourself into one of these groups and kind of use that to set the stage for the type of monetization work you're going to have to do. And we're going to dive into some of those things right now. So lesson 1, know who you're building for. Segment your users by their needs and their willingness to pay. A lot of companies don't even do customer segmentation, unfortunately, much to my dismay. Or when they do it, they tend to think about it in these like superficial, kind of high-level demographic variables. You know, somebody's gender, their age, small, medium, or large businesses. And I'm encouraging you to take this to the needs, the values, the willingness to pay side of segmentation. This is a nod to the book Monetizing Innovation, which I recommend to a lot of folks to read. It was written by some partners from the pricing firm, Simon Kucher, and they work with a lot of high-growth tech companies on their pricing and packaging. And let's highlight this with an example. I promised you examples from our portfolio and companies I've worked with. So I think Uber's a great example. It was brought to my attention that it's not available right now here in Vancouver, but bear with me. So what all customers of Uber have in common is they're trying to get from point A to point B. But what Uber and Lyft have done a tremendous job of is segmenting their offering according to needs and willingness to pay. So let's say you have a low willingness to pay. You're quite price sensitive. You're probably going to gravitate towards Uber Pool. This is a shared ride experience. So you might have to walk a few blocks to meet your driver. You might have to wait for them to pick up somebody else on the way. You'll get there. It might be a little slower, but you know you're getting the cheapest price. If you value speed, you might pay a little bit more to get UberX and drive alone. If you have a bunch of luggage or a big group, you might need an SUV, and you'll pay accordingly. And if you're the highest willingness to pay segment, the least price sensitive, not only do you want to get there quickly, you want to ride in style, you want the best car, so you might take an Uber Black. So this is an example of what it means to start segmenting your customers by needs and willingness to pay in the spirit of revenue maximization. So I'm assuming a bunch of you here work at SaaS companies. If you are self-serve, you probably have some plans that look something like this on your pricing page. Typically follow a good, better, best model, where your packages have higher quota limits, more features, and you're charging customers more along the way. One thing I tell folks when I look at these pricing pages, and there's a long laundry list of features that they're charging for, I tell them to watch out. Because value does not automatically translate to perceived value. What do I mean by this? If people don't even know that those features exist, you've got education work to do. If they know that they exist but don't value them, that's a failure as well. There's a story in that book, Monetizing Innovation, I recommended, about feature shock. This is an effect that they talk about with an example where they were doing a pricing study with a company catered to SMBs. And this company wasn't happy with their revenue growth, so Simon Kucher came in to help. And what they noticed was their plan for SMBs included 27 features. It's a lot, right? They whittled it down to 8, the features that drove the highest rate of conversion. They actually increased the price. And what happened? They increased sales by 25%. So in effect, they reduced the value. They took away 18 features, but what happened was they increased the perceived value that customers had in the product. Kind of removed a lot of the noise and let them focus on the ones that were the big revenue drivers. So the lesson here is to know who your customers are, why they pay you. Demand is never evenly distributed across all 27 features in your plan. And know how much they're willing to pay you. So how do we do this? Let's put some of these into practice. So I'd encourage each of you, if you care about monetization, to establish a pricing process, to bring some rigor around this pricing effort within your organization. Assign an owner. With my teams, these full stack growth and revenue teams, that was comprised of product managers, data scientists, user researchers. If you are more upmarket, sales is obviously a stakeholder here. So put together this cross-functional task force that owns pricing and can own it in an autonomous way and iterate on it over time. Next is the qualitative research. Talk to customers. Talk to prospective customers. Talk to churn customers. The great thing about having a sales team or a support team or a success team is you have folks who hear the voice of the customer day in and day out. So make sure that that's a feedback loop back in to your pricing strategy. There's different survey methods I've listed here, and we're going to dive into one of these on the next slide. And then the qualitative piece, that's helping bring a narrative to gaps in your monetization. Now you have to test things at scale. Don't be afraid to experiment. Try increasing prices. My hunch is that a lot of you are underpriced. If that can sound really scary, I get it. So if you are a larger business and maybe you have an international footprint, test things in one region, one country, kind of isolate your experimentation that way before you roll things out globally. And know that this work is never done. Much like your product roadmap is never done, every 12 to 18 months, if not more frequently, revisit your pricing. Think about your packaging. See if you're leaving money on the table. Okay, so I promised you to dive into some of these research methods. So the spirit here is understanding value and willingness to pay. So on the value side, I see a lot of survey questions that are, here's a list of features, tell me what you want. And the problem with asking things in that way is customers are going to say they want everything, right? But it's actually the relative prioritization between features where the best insights start to emerge. So another way to ask this question in a survey is give a customer 100 points and then ask them to spend those points across a list of features. The more they value a feature, the more points they should give it. Or label each feature as a must-have, a nice-to-have, and not necessary. And then what should be in an ideal package? The features that are nice to have and must have, which ones should we be packaging and selling to you? Those are some better ways to start understanding the relative prioritization of these features and where you have the most demand. So next is willingness to pay, and often this is totally overlooked. It can be perceived as taboo, just feels a little icky talking about money, but please front load these conversations. You're going to learn a lot. This is the Van Westendorp model. So one thing you can do now that you have this ideal package that a customer's defined for you is ask them, what's a reasonable price for this? Then ask them what's an expensive price, but you'd still be willing to pay it. And then finally, what's a prohibitively expensive price? So by forcing customers to give you this data, you're starting to learn the breakpoints of how you could actually price your plans. I hope this is helpful. Okay, so we've talked a lot about, what people have, what they value, what they're willing to pay. Let's now operationalize those learnings. So we're going to build a creative value for our customers. We're going to bucket that value into our packaging and price it accordingly. We did a lot of this work on my team at Invoice2Go. And much like the feature shock example from monetizing innovation, we heard from customers some new features that they wanted, and we understood which ones they valued most. We repackaged some of our plans a bit, and we were able to increase the upgrade rate of people going from a lower price starter plan to a higher price plan by over 100%. We even increased the price, so a lot more people were upgrading and paying us more in the process. And we didn't get any backlash. Customers thought it was fair. The match of price to value was fair. So how do we do this? You probably need to increase your prices. We're going to talk about that. A smart natural escalator, something built into your pricing model that can just naturally expand over time, is an effective way to do this. We're going to rebalance our sticks and carrots. I'll explain that. And finally, we're going to do a better job of upselling customers to higher price plans. Okay, so another story from a portfolio company. Envoy is something I assume several of you are familiar with. It's a visitor registration platform. And I was talking to the CEO, Larry, about his pricing. And he got a really good laugh. We both got a really good laugh out of the story. So he was in the second camp when I talked about how you think about pricing. He was so afraid of people not using the product that he just made it super, super cheap. He said, I don't want price to get in the way of usage. So he was talking to an enormous hospitality company, and he was pitching the product, and that prospective buyer was really leaning in. It was clear they wanted to buy. So the conversation quickly moved on to price. And Larry, at that point, Envoy was $20 a month. And here he is talking to a big hospitality company, massive global hospitality company. And so the guy asked how much it costs, and he said, it's $20, $200 a month. And literally in the same breath, he stuck his neck out and said, oh, I'm really going to make more money here, and 10x'd his price. And the buyer laughed and said, I see what you did there, but that's fine. I'll happily pay that. And so he thought he was really, really pushing the limits here, 10x'ing his price, live in real time. And he learned something really important, that he was still wildly underpriced. The guy didn't flinch. This was nothing to him. This was pennies. So he signed and was an early customer. So this was a big eye-opener for him about how much money he was probably leaving on the table. Okay, we talked about sticks and carrots. So this is a framework I use with a lot of companies. Your sticks, these are your quota limits. When you run out of storage in Dropbox, you need to upgrade to go to the next higher price plan, unlock more usage. That's a different strategy than a carrot. A carrot's something you dangle in front of a customer to get them to upgrade to the next plan. It's a new feature that they wouldn't have had otherwise. How do you pick these? Well, the thing about sticks is we see them every day. This is the Dropbox example I gave. This is messages on Slack. This is invoices you need to send in Invoice2Go. Maybe articles you're reading in The Economist. We experience these red dialogues a lot. And what's so powerful about these, two reasons. One, you're catching a user in a very high intent state. I want to send that invoice, or I want to save that file, or listen to that song on Spotify. So you're catching them in a moment when they really want to complete an action, so that increases their likelihood of paying you to do so. The other benefit of sticks is they don't require any additional education. This is a core value prop that a user already understands. It's the core utility of using the product. So sticks, or these quota limits, are really, really powerful revenue drivers. Okay, so I'm going to walk through an example of how another portfolio company, Carta, decided on their stick, their value metric. So Carta is a platform for managing equity ownership, a really messy problem for a venture-backed business. And they thought deeply about how to price this cap table management feature. And so they first started out and they said, well, maybe we'll price it by number of admin seats. Well, the problem with that is revenue doesn't scale with value. What I mean by that is the admins are going to be a few folks from legal, from the finance team. They're the ones who are going to be in the tool day in and day out. But most employees don't actually need to log in more than a couple times a year. So as a company grows, Carta's not necessarily making any more money. So that didn't work. Then they thought about number of equity grants. So every time an employee gets an equity grant, Carta would get paid. Well, that doesn't work either. Really disincentivize usage. They were afraid that it might change the cadence with which companies grant equity to employees. So then they thought about number of shareholders, number of lines on the cap table. And this one felt really aligned. Because the thing about this, equity ownership gets the gnarliest when the lines in the cap table grow. As you hire more and more employees, as you raise more money and have more investors on the cap table. So here, as a company grows, Carta continues to create more value for businesses. Companies derive so much more value from the platform that they're happy to pay more and more and more. So they're quite satisfied with this as their stick. So next is picking the right premium features, or carrots. So when Carta first got started, they focused on the SMB segment. They offered things around company formation and 409A valuations, and customers loved it. But what they noticed was these customers would also grow really quickly, and as they grew, their needs would evolve. They started having more complex board structures. They started having liquidity events like secondaries. And so Carta quickly realized they needed to continue to develop and build new features to unlock more value as these segments started to evolve. Then they moved up market into enterprise, started getting demand around integrations with different HR and payroll providers. And so as they continued to add value, they just continued to charge more along the way. And what has this done for Carta? This is a chart showing how long it's taken certain companies to go from 0 to $100 million in ARR. Pretty incredible. Slack breaks the mold here, having done this in 3 years. And we plotted Carta once they transitioned from a pay-as-you-go model to their recurring revenue model. And they're in pretty good company in this list. So by having a very thoughtful monetization strategy, this company also gets to benefit from tremendous network effects, the relationships between LPs and venture capital firms and startups. But this really can power up your business. Okay, so we talked about needs and willingness to pay. We incorporate those learnings into how we do our pricing and packaging, continuing to create value, but monetize for that value. We're going to push things even further. This last one is around using predictive data to further enhance your monetization. This is meeting customers where they are in a personalized way on their journey through conversion, upgrades, and renewals. Okay? We had a hypothesis at Invoice2Go that we could predict which customers had a high propensity to renew versus a low propensity to renew. We collected a bunch of variables and started building models and found out which variables were indeed the most indicative of somebody's renewal. And we used that to segment our customers, all the way from very low propensity to very high propensity. Our goal here was to, again, personalize, meet customers where they were, to drive the metric that we cared about. Here's a few examples around the personalization in action. For customers who had a very low propensity to renew, we wanted to focus on both value and price. On the value side, we made an effort to educate them. What were the features that they weren't using that we thought they might derive value from? So we did a lot to help showcase those features within the product via email, push notifications. We also played with price. We said, well, maybe these folks don't actually value the product as much, so maybe we should give them a targeted discount. So by properly aligning price to value for this low propensity segment, we could speak to them in a way that would resonate with the way they were using the product and their perceived value of the product. Then there's the other end of the spectrum, right? We had folks that had a very high propensity to renew. And what we did in that case was a little different. We analyzed those customers and found, based on their usage and what we knew about them, there was likely a big segment of this group that would benefit from an upgrade at renewal. So we actually promoted upgrades throughout their renewal experience. We thought they could benefit from it, but we also got a big bump in revenue. So by putting some of these efforts into practice, my team, with just a few of these experiments out of the gate, drove a 10% lift in expansion MRR. I saw the power of this firsthand, and I wanted more companies to operate this way. So when I moved into investing, a company I met pretty early on called Clearbrain really stood out to me. They do this AI-driven growth. What had taken my company the better part of a year to build and operationalize these predictive models, they offer to you out of the box. Help you understand what actually causes your customers to convert and monetize well. Here's a case study from one of their customers, Envision, product I'm sure folks are familiar with. It's a product design platform. They were an early customer of clearbrain, and they wanted to do something similar to what we had done at Invoice2Go. They wanted to target who had a high propensity to upgrade. They used clearbrain to do so and targeted those customers with the right message in the right channel. They used Facebook as well as Braze for some of their in-app dialogues, like pictured here. And they were able to increase their conversion from 4% to 10%. So more than doubled by just targeting the right users in the right way. Another data-driven example. So Slack is kind of the darling of bottom-up SaaS, rightfully so. Such an amazing company. And they are the perfect example of a product that self-serve, easy to get going, start using it, but over time it starts expanding wall-to-wall throughout the organization. And so they have the self-serve version, and that's driven by a product team. But what happens in the self-serve version is some different segments start to emerge. You've got some SMBs in there, small companies, getting the benefit of Slack without requiring conversation with a salesperson. But what's also showing up in the self-serve group are some small teams within enormous enterprise companies. Fortune 100 companies are kind of showing up in here, kicking the tires through the self-serve version. So what Slack does is use data around what they know about these customers, how they use the product, and use that to do qualified leads as a nice handoff from the product team to the sales team. So the sales team now, with a human touch, can come in and handhold the upsell paths for some of these larger corporations and drive huge expansion in ACV. Okay, so let's wrap. Our first lesson was knowing about who our users are, segmenting them by what they need and have a willingness to pay for. We're then building accretive value. What do people actually want? How do we package it and price it accordingly so that we're compensated for that value? But how do we keep pushing with more of this predictive, kind of AI-driven way of monetization? I hope this was helpful and you have something to take back with you to your companies. Please do report back. I'd love to hear what you learned. And thank you for spending your morning with me.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.